Okay, we've got one bolt in place. We want to do that for safety reasons so we don't raise that big heavy wheel off the ground. Now we'll put in the 6 bolts and we'll tighten them up, and that will complete the assembly of the lower section of the sifter. From here, what we're going to do is set the sifter on a flatly machined platform, and we'll put the X-frame on and show you how to shim the sifter. If you were rebuilding the sifter, you would not have to change the weights at all. You'd simply take it apart, change the bearings, and reassemble it as we've just done. Okay, we're going to take a break now. We're going to take the sifter and we're going to set it on the shimming platform. Back a little bit, Rand. That's good. Right there. Right there. Ho. Okay, down. Down. Okay, forklift out. Okay, what we're going to do now is put 4 of our shimming tools on. And that shimming tool is a piece of angle with an adjustable bolt on it that allows us to adjust the wheel on all 4 legs to make sure we get it perfectly level. By leveling the wheel, we're going to in turn level the upper spindle because they're all fastened together on machined surfaces. And by having the sifter setting on a flat, level surface, leveling the wheels, we can then put on the X-frame and have that run perfectly true and flat. The shimming is probably the most misunderstood and probably causes most of the wear on the sifter decks. If the sifter is shimmed correctly, it will run in a 2.5-inch circle day in and day out, causing no wear on the decks or the stabilizer assemblies on the sifter. With these shim tools, it's very easy to get the wheels lined up. If you don't have the shim tools, I recommend you use the tapered wood shims and drive them in. You want to rock it in both directions to make sure it's tight. And why don't we put the level back on there and bring the camera in and show you exactly how level it is. What we're doing is we're putting on 4 1/8-inch rods, which will give us our proper clearance. Now we're going to bring the X-frame over and mount the stabilizer assemblies to it. What we do is turn it upside down, and we're going to take the 4 stabilizer assemblies and we're going to mount them to the X-frame. When you mount the stabilizer assemblies, you want the bolts to be out and to the right. This way, when you flip it over, you don't have the end of a bolt hitting into the motor mount. And we'll simply bolt these down with lock washers. Now what's going to happen when they get these bolted down and tightened up, they will turn it over, and since we know we've got that upper wheel perfectly flat and level, we know the X-frame will be sitting on the sifter perfectly flat and level. Since we've got several machine surfaces all stacked up, we're going to put in the shim stock between the bottom clevis on the stabilizer assembly and the top leg of the spider base. The reason we do it this way is we can put in whatever shim stock is required to fill in the gap, and if the machining is off a thousandths or two, we can fill it in with shim stock. This assures that the machine is going to run in a perfectly flat and true and level environment, which will cause no wear to the decks or to the legs that they're putting on right now. And we'll turn the camera off here when we start using the air tool to tighten them up. What we're going to do now, we've got all four legs on the X-frame. We're going to set it on top of the 1/8 inch rods, and we're going to fill in all the available space between the legs and the spider base with shim stock. The shims come in 3 different thicknesses. And the option is to just very easily put the shim stock in. We don't want to raise the X-frame up. We just want to fill in the void. Okay, once we get the shims under, what we're going to do is press down on all 4 legs. Make sure that they're down tight, and then we're going to take out the 4 rods, and we're going to bolt the stabilizer assemblies in place. Now we've got the 4 stabilizer legs down. DJ, give it a move so they can see that you've still got 1/8 of an inch clearance. And what we're going to do then is take off the clamps. We're going to push the stabilizers and the X-frame over to line up our upper spindle. That means that each one of the 4 legs is going to have exactly the same angle on it, and will rotate then in a perfect 2.5 inch circle. It is impossible to take one of those stabilizer assemblies out and put it back in one at a time and do it correctly. That's why we recommend that once a year you change your stabilizer assemblies, and at the same time line them up, level it up, and they'll be good for another year. What usually happens is somebody will take out one stabilizer assembly and they can't get the new one back in place, so they don't put the shim stock in place. And then when they tighten it down, that one particular leg becomes shorter by whatever thickness the shim stock was. And I'll show you what happens in that case in a moment. Okay, now what we're going to do, if we can get a real tight shot, is, Randy, if you rotate it, this is going to rotate it in a 2.5 inch circle, and it will be perfectly flat. So that means that it's shimmed up correctly, and the sifter will run forevermore in a perfect flat concentric 2.5 inch circle. By doing that, your stabilizer legs are going to last at least a year, and the decks that are above it are going to get very long life. Now we're going to take a break here, and I'm going to put a hopper on here, and I'm going to put a broken deck on here and show you what happens when these shims are not put in place. Okay, what we've got here now is an old beat up hopper and a deck. The reason these decks crack in the corner is whoever sent these decks in had this stabilizer assembly shimmed up improperly. If this stabilizer assembly is shimmed up, say, 1/8 of an inch too low, what we're doing is taking this surface here and this surface here, and we're compressing 1/8 of an inch. What happens then is, as this sifter rotates in a 2.5 inch circle, 265 times a minute, it's taking these decks and it's flexing them. What happens when the decks flex is you break the corners out in them. So anybody that has broken decks like this, it's because the stabilizer assemblies are not shimmed up correctly. This other thing on your decks, guys, can you flip that over? Unless the decks are held in tight, you're going to wear your gaskets. The deck should be torqued down to 30 foot-pounds torque, and what that'll do is keep the gasket surfaces from rubbing against one another. It'll also keep the holes in the deck from getting egg-shaped. We're going to go inside now and show you how to properly gasket a deck. Okay, this is an old deck, and what DJ's doing is cleaning the track. The track has to be perfectly clean, and all the glue has to be off it before you can put the new gasket in it. Now this is a dovetail joint that's in this deck. So you got to remember, you've got to scrape the glue and the old gasket out of that dovetail. So we actually modify a screwdriver and cut a dovetail into it so that when we drag it down the track, it scrapes out everything in it. Once that's done, we'll wire brush it, and then the gasket can be put back in just like we do on a new deck. But when you regasket a deck, it's very important to get it clean. Before we do a new deck, I'll show you an insert frame. Okay, our insert frames that we have here are made two different ways. We have screws which are held in, which is the old way of doing it. The plastic zippy ties is the preferred way of doing it now. It makes it very easy to replace the ball wire. This ball wire should be replaced about every 5 years. The wire on the other side of the screen is your sifting wire, and you can see the balls and cubes inside. What you want to do is, since we've gone to the polyurethane balls, these polyurethane balls will last approximately a year in normal surface. What happens is, people that are still using the rubber balls, the fumigant that can be in the product tends to make the rubber balls swell up. Once they swell up, there's no room between the ball wire and the screen for the ball to bounce, and it simply sets in there. The other thing we see is people that leave the balls in too long, and the balls wear through to where they'll actually go through the wire very shortly and wind up in the product. So it's very important that when sanitation takes it apart, they check to make sure the balls don't need to be replaced, or if they've got rubber balls in it, they haven't swelled up. The other thing on an insert frame, and we'll show you when we gasket the hopper, is these corners are meant to slide in under 2 screws. If the corner is broken, it needs to be repaired. And we'll flip this deck over and show you. We'll take a break here. What we're going to do now is just show you in the top of the sifter deck, you have 2 flat screws, one on either side. This is going to have a gasket in it. It's very important to have the screen fit under those screws. So what we're basically doing is taking the insert frame, the groove in it, and we're placing it in back of those screws. And it'll slide right in. That makes it flush. What a lot of folks do is they'll set it on top like this, and it won't go down all the way because that screw is blocking it, and they beat it in with a hammer. As soon as they beat it in with a hammer, they break off the corner of the screen, and then it has to be replaced. Okay, we're going to gasket a new deck now, and they gasket the same way as the old decks do. Okay, now we're going to gasket a CS-1 sifter deck. In a CS-1 sifter deck, you have several different types of gaskets. You have the lip seal, which DJ's got in his hand right now, and you'll notice that it's got a dovetail groove on it. That goes down in the groove of the sifter, and the flat lip on it lays on top of the screen above it. That gasket will be put on 3 sides of the sifter. The other gasket is a plain seal, and that's simply a dovetail piece of rubber with a flat surface that goes on the opposite 3 sides of the sifter. Then we have a tail seal, which is what the insert frame butts up against, and then we have 4 corner seals, which will go on the corner of the sifter. Now, if you go to a little wider shot, DJ will show you that he'll put the lip seals on the end of the sifter where you have the pocket where the flour or product drops down through, and on the 2 sides right there, so that what it basically does is seals the screen that will be below it. He'll put the plain seal on the outside edges and the back where you don't have any contact with the material. You just simply want to keep the product inside the sifter. The corner seals obviously go on the corners, and the tail seal will go on the other side of the deck. We're using a 3M rubber adhesive. We keep it refrigerated. We're using a rolling pin, and what we're basically going to do is stretch these gaskets out so that they'll go into the dovetail groove, and then the gasket will expand back to its normal size and fill the groove in entirely. We'll sand any dust or powder off of the gasket with a wire brush and then just blow it off. And what this does is gets rid of any dust, powder from molding. We'll apply the glue, and he'll apply the glue to the deck, and he'll take a 1/2-inch brush and just make sure the glue is nice and uniform. And this has to be done fairly quickly and smoothly. It can't be done in a walk out, get a phone call, and come back, because the glue will take a set. And what he's basically doing with the rolling pin is just pushing it down in the groove, stretching it out, and the gasket will immediately come back in. Then he's going to cut a notch at a 45-degree angle and trim off the upper portion. What that does is allows the next gasket to butt up against it uniformly. You might do the next one a little slower, D, so you can see how they do it. He's going to cut that at a 45-degree angle. And then he's going to trim off the lip. Then he's going to cut it to the right length so that when he rolls it in place, it fills the entire groove. It also squashes out any excess glue. Okay, that gasket is in place. He'll do the same thing on the other two sides, and what that'll do is give them the inner seal for the deck, so that when that's placed on top of a screen, the lip seal will cover the three portions of the screen that match to the deck above it. DJ's been doing this since he was 12 years old, so he got pretty good at it. And the 45-degree groove will be cut in this one so that when the gaskets lay down flat, they match perfectly. And he'll do the one on the other side here. He'll once again cut his 45-degree angle on the end. And he'll change that razor blade out after every deck. Trying to cut the gasket with a dull razor blade is very difficult. And he'll trim it off at the other end. And now he'll put in his 3 pieces of plain seal.
What
we see on a lot of decks that come in for repair is people don't re-gasket the sifters, and the gaskets get hard and brittle after sanitation cleans them or steams them or scrubs them several times over a period of years, and the gaskets get hard and brittle and fall out. And then people try to put silicone in, or they try to put duct tape on it. And the gaskets are very easily changed. It only takes about 15 minutes to do a deck. We're actually doing this one totally live, so it doesn't take that long to re-gasket a sifter, and it makes for a whole lot better sanitation a lot neater plant, and you don't have spillage coming out of the sifter. So if your gaskets are hard or flattened out or worn, you might want to look at regasketing them. And all it basically takes is getting a rolling pin and the gaskets and glue. Most of your shops have the razor blades and razor knives.